New set, new PowerPoint, lots of good cards. Let's talk about them. There are a lot of sweet build around brew potential cards, but the one that just has me going crazy, the one I keep thinking about nonstop, is Insidious Roots. Insidious Roots is a 2-mana enchantment that says every creature token you control has the ability to tap for 1 mana of any color. And whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, you make a plant that'll have the ability to tap for mana next turn, and then you put a +1 counter on each plant you control. And this isn't limited to once a turn, and it just goes really crazy, really wide, lots of power, lots of toughness, lots of mana. As long as you have an engine that's able to get creatures out of your graveyard really quickly. And in modern specifically, there's two like kind of nice engines to do this like repeatedly every single turn. You either have Oval Chase Daredevil plus Underworld Cookbook. This will let you discard the Oval Chase Daredevil, put a trigger on the stack to return it, triggering Insidious Roots, or Witch's Oven to sack your Cauldron Familiar to Witch's Oven. Sack the food token you get, return the familiar every single turn to trigger Insidious Roots over and over every single turn. You can also use cards like Agatha's Soul Cauldron to target stuff in the graveyard to trigger the Insidious Roots, put a counter on everything. Each plant will have whatever abilities you put underneath Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I could see this card going in, like, this is just such a powerful card. You'll be able to brew with it in Asmo decks with Cookbook, Sacrifice synergies with like Mayhem Devil Goblin Bombardment. You'll be able to like try like Yawgmoth, Agatha's Soul Cauldron synergies. There's a few extra synergies here too, where this triggers when you like Undying a Young Wolf. Gives like your Orc token from Orcish Bowmaster the ability to tap for mana. You can even lean a little bit harder into the plant tokens by playing stuff like Colony Garden in your deck. I might even like try to find like a Hardened Scales variant that has a few more ways to trigger this card. It just does so much. It just does so much for 2 mana. A ridiculous engine card. Something I am super excited to play with, and I'll be playing tons of different shells of almost immediately off the bat. It only took them like 2.5 years, but they finally printed the second Arch Charm cycle. We've had Archmage's Charm, we have Archdruid's Charm. I'd love to see black, white, and red of these cycle at some point. This is also a kind of secret 5-mode charms where you can do 5 things. You can either search your library for a land, put it into play tapped, search your library for a creature, put it into your hand, have a creature you control deal power to another creature, put a counter on it, exile an artifact, or exile an enchantment. This is an insane amount of versatility for a 3-mana card, but I will say that in Modern, versatility is not necessarily as valuable as power. That being said, this first mode, the ability to specifically put a land from your library into play tapped, this is the cheapest way to do that in Modern. There's not a card that exists in Modern that costs 3 or less mana that lets you search your library for any land and put it into play. And there are a lot of really good lands you can put in play in Modern. Nykthos Shrine to Nyx is kind of like the one I'm most excited about. You can also do some Lotus Field shenanigans. I've also been kind of talking to a friend of mine about trying this card in like a mono green infect list where you play like 8 of the Hierarchs, and then on turn 2, end of turn, hopefully you're going to Archdruid's Charm, put an Inkmoth Nexus into play, tapped, untap, and kill your opponent. You can also use it as a removal spell, some way to get rid of the One Ring, get rid of creatures, that kind of stuff. But besides that Inkmoth Nexus brew, you're mostly going to see this in ramp decks, and I think it's very cool that this is something that's both a ramp enabler and a ramp payoff, where you can either put a Nykthos into play, or you could just grab a Primeval Titan. And it does those things while also functioning as creature removal. Sometimes you're going to be able to like have a big creature in play, and your opponent's going to have a giant flying Murktide Regent that you'd otherwise have a hard time dealing with, but you can use Archdruid's Charm to remove the Murktide sometimes. And the fact that it gets rid of both the One Ring and Urza Saga, and like sometimes Blood Moon too in response, it really just does everything. I'm super excited about it. I'm kind of hopeful too that you can do some like Eternal Witness loops with it, but maybe that era of Modern is kind of gone. But we will definitely be cooking with this a lot. It's certainly a super exciting card. So there's another mono green devotion, mono green rant payoff card in the new set, Leyline of the Guildpact. It's both mono green and also 5 colors. It has all of the green hybrid symbols as the mana cost. Because these are all unique mana symbols, you can play Jegantha as a companion and this card, which I just think is very funny. I think that this is mostly going to be a mono green devotion card in both Pioneer and Modern. I think that this combination of Archdruid's Charm and Leyline of the Guildpact are going to be something that I'll be trying, a lot of people will be trying as like a more powerful, like nut draw focused engine in Pioneer and Modern. Like one thing when I was like looking at Leyline of the Guildpact was like I was very specifically thinking Obviously, this gives you 4 devotion for 0 mana, and it's very good with Nykthos, but like, how can we guarantee that we have Nykthos a bit more often if we're going to put this card in our deck? And they've also given us that tool in Archdruid's Charm in the same set. So I'm going to be trying a lot of that at first, I think. Charm plus Leyline and Pioneer and Modern. I think, you know, they're kind of different decks, the Green Devotion decks in both formats, but we'll be trying both. I think that there's also in Modern some applications with Scion of Draco and Leyline of the Guildpact. When this card first got spoiled, people kept asking me about it. I'm like, why would you want to do that? And I just didn't realize that Scion could give its abilities to itself. I thought it was each other creature, but the fact that this would allow you to, like, it's also kind of an extra combo too, because it just means you have domain. If you have Leyline of the Guildpact in any 2 lands, you'll be able to play Scion of Draco on turn 2. And it'll be a 2 mana hexproof lifelink, first strike, trample, and that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I feel like if you're gonna play this in Domain Zoo, though, if you're gonna play Scion of Draco and Leyline of the Guildpact, you are probably gonna want to play some pitch cards too. You're gonna play Grief, Subtlety, some combination of these probably, so that you can pitch your Leylines when you draw them later. Maybe you're playing like Fable. I'm not gonna be super happy main decking 4 of these just to try to combo with Scion and then have a bunch of dead draws in my deck, probably. And it would be really cool if there was another like combo with the card in the deck too, like something as powerful as Scion of Draco. I need to do like a bit of a deeper dive. At the moment, I don't really think that there's anything super duper good or nothing that I could find kind of in my memory banks. But one card that is kind of cool with it is Bloom Tender. Maybe this is more of like casual thing, but if you have, this taps for 5 mana. The problem is like 2 mana 1 toughness creatures with no ETB effect are just not playable in this Orcish Bowmaster format, I think, with maybe only a very few exceptions, and I don't really think this is an exception, especially when you're trying to combo it with a Leyline, like a 0 mana card you put in play. You're just setting yourself up to get blasted and like ripped apart really easily. But it is cool, and I would like love to be able to do this one day, but probably not any day soon. Reenact the Crime is a super unique card. It's even kind of hard to compare it to anything besides like Show and Tell. For 4 mana, you can exile a non-land card in a graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn. Copy it, you may cast the copy without paying the mana cost. So ideally, you're going to use cards like Underworld Cookbook, Faithless Salvaging, Fable the Mirror Breaker to put a copy of Omniscience or Emrakul in your graveyard, and for 4 mana, cast a copy. You get the extra turn with the Emrakul, you get to put Omniscience in play and like combo off immediately. But there's also like just a lot more going on with this card too. You can copy anything your opponent happens to put in the graveyard too. You can also like evoke a Solitude and copy that as well. And you can do it all at instant speed, sometimes with Force of Negation up. This is a very, very unique card and a really, really powerful one too. It's like, it really does feel like Show and Tell kind of like balanced for Modern, or like a Show and Tell that you need to have some graveyard synergies with too, so this way it's like a little bit easier to hate out. I'm really excited about it. I'm having a hard time picturing that this is going to be better than like cascading into a Living End, but the upside, of course, is that you don't have to build your deck with like these kind of cascade requirements, and you do get to get around some hate cards like Chalice of the Void and stuff like that. So I'm hopeful that it'll be good. I am a little bit skeptical because it is weak to a lot of stuff, and it is kind of slow, but it'll be really, really sweet when it goes off. And for a long time, I've been really wanting like a good way to cheat Omniscience into play. I think this is a good bit better than Resurgent Belief, where you can, you get a lot of extra utility. You get to do this at instant speed. You don't walk into like a bunch of the hate cards. You don't have to like suspend on turn 2 and like really telegraph all of your lines. I like this card a lot, and I'm optimistic. Maybe not the flashiest, maybe not the most exciting, but there is a set of fetchable dual lands in Murders of Karlov Manor. They always enter tapped, but when they enter the battlefield, they let you surveil 1, and they're fetchable, and I think they're going to see a lot of play in Modern. I don't think they're going to see play in every deck with fetch lands, but I think every deck with fetch lands should really seriously consider them. I think that if you are a deck that's playing graveyard synergies and a lot of fetch lands, like maybe Esper Gorios, you might even play 2. I think that if you're a reactive deck like Blue-White Control or Blue-Red Murktide, you're definitely going to want the first copy where you're like sitting up on some interactive instant speed spells. Opponent doesn't play into them, you can just fetch to tap Surveil land on end of turn. I also think that these will unfortunately be a pretty big buff to Rhinos, where like Rhinos gamers just so often keep a 2-land hand that just like is almost unbeatable if they draw out their land, and it can be kind of dicey if they don't. And just the ability to like fetch a Surveil land and just like get an extra look at land number 3, I think is such a big deal. I do think that Leyline binding decks are kind of a big question mark to me. I'm not sure if Leyline binding decks are going to want to play 1 Triumph, 1 Surveil land, 2 Triumphs, 1 Surveil land, or just no Surveil lands. I think it'll kind of depend. I think you'll have to play around a little bit, but decks like 4-color Omnath may just feel like their mana really, really needs the Triumphs a bit more than it wants an effect like this. But also, Omnath is a deck that is very prone to flooding out, and having some insulation like this is super valuable. I think that these are going to be modern staples. I think that the opportunity cost of including a utility land that you can fetch is just so often worth it to turn like your like 8 to 12 fetch lands and giving them more utility is worth the cost of including like 1 tap land in your deck. Kind of similar to Mystic Sanctuary, obviously not to the power level of Mystic Sanctuary, but just like Mystic Sanctuary was a land that would be awkward to draw early, it would enter tapped, but the ability to like just reduce variance and to enable consistency and give utility to like 8, 10, 12 cards in your deck is a really big deal, and these are, in my opinion, going to see a lot of play. I don't think I've ever, since I've been doing these PowerPoint videos, put a sideboard card this high on the list, but Pick Your Poison is not your average modern sideboard card. This is a new modern staple. I think every single deck with green in the format should very seriously consider having several copies of this in their sideboard. I think that it competes really hard with Force of Vigor, and in a lot of spots it's going to be better than Force of Vigor when you don't have a density of pitch cards, and also when you're really looking to answer Murktide Regent and when you're looking to answer the One Ring. But kind of simply put, like when you're building your sideboards and you're building and you want answers in your sideboard, like 3 of the biggest cards you want answers for are the One Ring, Murktide Regent, and Urza Saga. This is something that like I've been building a lot of sideboards in Modern, and these are 3 cards I always want to have a plan for, and this card deals with all of them. Also can kill Amulet of Vigor. It just does so much for 1 mana. For 1 mana, answers so many different permanents. I almost even feel like you could main deck this card. I don't even think it's dead against any deck. Like Rakdos has Urza Saga, Rhinos plays Murktide Regent. I would imagine that this is going to be more of a sideboard card, but I would love this. I could even imagine like the blue-red like wizard decks with Snapcaster like splashing for specifically this card. Super excited for it. I expected to see a lot of play, and I'm definitely going to be having several copies of my sideboard in the upcoming weeks. Aftermath Analyst is a really, really cool card. It's a 2-mana 1/3. It enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards, and then at instant speed, you can spend 4 mana and return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So it's kind of like a hybrid Archaeologist Splendid Reclamation with the ability to like the fact that it self mills, the fact that the card it comes down, fills your graveyard for the lands, and you can just sit on it for a while, block Ragavan, block Orcish Bowmasters, ephemerate it maybe, dump 6 more cards in your graveyard, and then whenever you're ready, whenever you're up to it, you get to spend 4 mana to dump your graveyard, all the lands into play. It is pretty appealing to me. Like I used to play some Splendid Reclamation decks in Modern. This was kind of back in the Field of the Dead days. I would sometimes play them in Gifts and Given piles, where I could gifts for Uro and Mystic Sanctuary and Splendid Reclamation and Life from the Lobe, and it was awesome. I have really, really fond memories of those days. And I've tried to build some Splendid Reclamation decks in the last year or two, and the problem really is that like Splendid Reclamation it doesn't self-enable super well. It gets your fetch lands back, but it's a slow 4 mana sorcery that like you have to like have built all of your early game plan around. But Aftermath Analyst kind of solves all of those problems, where it's a 2 mana card that is either going to like trade 1-for-1 for a removal spell or win the game by itself later. Very low on the mana curve, blocks Ragavan early, which is super duper nice, and it self-enables because you're milling 3. I'm really excited to try to build some like more kind of old school counterspell style Scape Shift decks. I might also play Archaeologist on those decks. Like, they're gonna be like mostly non-creature based, and kind of play these 2 cards as your main enablers. Maybe you play some like Thought Scour, Considers type stuff. But these decks are gonna be really cool. Just kind of old school counterspell Valakut decks, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that they're gonna do good. Gleaming Geardrake was actually spoiled a while ago and is one of like the first teaser cards. It's a 2-mana 1/1 flyer that when you enter the battlefield you investigate, and whenever you sacrifice an artifact you get to put a counter on it. Really like exciting text for a 2-drop flyer that has the potential to get really big, to also investigate when it enters the battlefield. It kind of like solves a little bit of the problems that you could have right now in the modern format of playing a 2-mana 1/1 creature that dies to Bowmasters, because you at least get a little bit of value from the investigate token if that just happens on turn 2, and its power and toughness grow really quickly, so you kind of quickly get out of ping range 2, or hopefully. I would love to play this in hardened scales, or try to play this in hardened scales. The blue-red casting cost there is kind of ambitious, but I think we could try to figure it out, or we can try to build like we can try to build something new, and that's obviously like what this stream is about, and what this channel is about, is building something new and building something beautiful. I don't know exactly what I'm doing with the Geardrake yet, but I think the card is powerful and it's very synergistic. I think we could be I don't have it here on the slide, but the card is also really nice, I think, with Goblin Engineer, not just because Engineer triggers the Geardrake for the sacrifice, but having an artifact that makes 2 artifacts on ETB is really nice with Engineer, where you can like sacrifice the Geardrake, get something else back, then sacrifice the clue token, bring back the Geardrake, kind of do that over and over again. Also, the counter synergies work with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. You can move these counters around with the Ozolith. Academy Manufactor is kind of nice with Geardrake, because you put like a bunch of treasures and clues and foods into play to sacrifice to grow it. And then also when Geardrake enters the battlefield, it triggers Manufactor. So lots of overlapping synergies. I expect to have like a half dozen decks with this card over the course of the next few months, and I would love for the card to be good because it is just so sweet. For a long time, I've been trying to build a Goblin Engineer Agatha's Soul Cauldron deck. At first glance, it feels like it would be just kind of super doable, right? Agatha's Soul Cauldron, incredibly good, typal synergistic creature combo card with activated abilities. Goblin is a goblin, which is one of the better creature types in Modern, that has a really good activated ability, and it cares about artifacts, which Agatha's Soul Cauldron is. But like kind of like diving deeper into it, like there just aren't that many other goblins that kind of like fit that requirement. There's like a 2-mana 2/2 that just came out. If you descended, you get to make a treasure token. Like that card has been in some of these lists, but there just like aren't that many payoffs, or at least there weren't until we got Crime Novelist, and I think to a little bit of a lesser extent, Grinko, Baron of 10th Street. Crime Novelist is really exciting because it goes infinite with animation module and any artifact sack outlet. You make infinite power, you get infinite of these sacrifices. It's kind of a convoluted loop. I'm not going to explain every little piece of it, but it's nice. And it's really nice that animation module is like tutorable off Urza Saga. These kind of like elements of combo pieces, if they're tutorable off Saga, they're a little bit easier to assemble. And then Krinko, Baron of 10th Street, has a really good activated ability for these decks too that also works very well with Crime Novelist. It's a 3-mana 3/3 haste. You can tap it, sacrifice an artifact, put a +1 counter on each goblin you control, and whenever an artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you can pay a red. If you do, you get to make a goblin. And then Crime Novelist gives you the red, and then you get to put a counter on the Novelist when you sacrifice the artifact, and you get to use Agatha's Soul Cauldron to give all of your creatures the Krinko's ability, including sometimes the creatures that you make from Krinko's ability, the goblins that you make. It can get like a little crazy. We may be missing a few pieces. I'm not sure. Do you want to play Snoop combo in this kind of shell? Do you want to maybe like have some like goblin synergies, but also play cards like Gleaming Geardrake? Do you need to play cards like Arcbound Ravager? Are there like better artifact sack outlets that you could play in the shell? I don't really think so, but there's some. There's like Tuk Tuk, I think, can sacrifice artifacts. I might be misremembering, or no, not Tuk Tuk. Slowbad. I think Slowbad is a goblin that can sacrifice artifacts. You might want to play that in here too. Goblin Matron, Aether Vial, this kind of stuff. It'll be a lot of fun. I'll spend some time cooking. Hopefully it's good, but it'll definitely be fun to try to figure this out. If you've been around for like the last year or so, you might know that like Walls are one of my favorite decks in Modern. I don't know. It's just very fun to tap Overgrown Battlement and Axebane Guardian for tons and tons of mana. Use Tyvar to untap them or bring back to the battlement. Just go crazy, cast your whole deck, and then like either smack turn all your walls into creatures with Walking Bulwark, or like go infinite with Staff of Domination off Karn. I really like Walls. I am a very big fan of the deck, and you're getting Walls is finally getting buffed. Although secretly the deck really just got nerfed, because when they banned Fury, you lost one of the main reasons to play the deck because you just had so much toughness, you didn't really care about Fury that much, and everybody's playing Cursed Totem now. It's tough. It's really tough. But the Pride of Hull Clade is awesome. It's an 11 mana Crocodile Elk Turtle that costs X less, where X is the total toughness of creatures you control. So this is really often going to be a 1, 2, 3 mana 2/15, and for 4 mana you can have a creature you control get +1/+0, can attack, and then you draw cards equal to its toughness. Very only when it hits a player, but very weird card. Very weird card. I think most of the time you're probably going to just be using Walking Bulwark or like Arcades, just like a different way to just turn this into like a 1 mana 15 power attacker that dodges Fatal Push and dodges all red removal ever printed. I think that's going to be a bit more often, but sometimes you'll draw 15 cards, and sometimes when you draw 15 cards, your opponent will kill you with Orcish Bowmaster. But I'm excited. We're going to do this for sure. It's going to be awesome, and I don't know. This card is super, super sweet. The set is kind of the set of weird green combos. We also have Chalk Outline, a 4 mana uncommon enchantment that says whenever one or more creatures leave your graveyard, you can create a 2/2 white-blue detective creature token and then investigate. So this is pretty good if you just have Oval Chase Daredevil Underworld Cookbook, where you're doing this every turn, making a 2/2, investigating. Not super powerful, but nice and synergistic and can outgrind some opponents. But if you have a kind of recursive discard outlet with something like Lot with Troll is probably the best discard outlet you can play for this kind of plan. You do have to have one more way to kind of trigger the loop, but you'll be able to discard Oval Chase Daredevil, and then once you get that investigate counter on the stack, the Daredevil will come back to your hand. You'll discard the Troll. You'll do this kind of over and over and over again until this is infinite power and you have infinite tokens, both creature detectives and clue tokens. Excited to get this going. I don't think it's going to be the most competitive ever, but we'll try it in some of our food shells. And it's also true that like we have like the Insidious Roots stuff that we want to be doing, and like this could be like in some of our Insidious Root brews, we could try this plan, if that makes sense, and see if it's like one of the better plans. We also have a really cool like Crucible of Worlds variant in Undergrowth Recon. Kind of a weird card. 3 mana, at the beginning of your upkeep, you return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So unlike cards like Crucible of Worlds, you can't get any value from it the turn you play it, and lands enter tapped instead of untapped, but unlike cards like Crucible of Worlds, this does not cost you your land drop. So it's like a Crucible of Worlds, but it's like a turn slower, but that is ramping you every single turn instead of just giving you that extra land drop, which I think is pretty exciting. I think you could do some cool stuff with Field of Ruin cards, Nurturing Peatland, like, you know, the Horizon lands that you draw you cards, obviously the fetch lands. I think that these style of decks, these like kind of like land matter decks, you know, it's always kind of funny to try to build them in a format where you could just build Amulet Titan instead. But I think we're gonna try. I think Sunken Citadel is like a really exciting card to pair with Undergrowth Recon, and also if you're able to like Field of Ruin your opponent really aggressively really often with Recon, you could be doing it twice a turn. Like that would give you a lot of game against a deck like Amulet Titan, which is a reason to play a deck like this for sure, and it'll certainly be pretty cool. Okay, I'm kind of going out on a limb here. I may really regret saying this like 3 weeks from now, but I really like Cryptic Coat. I'm like very high on this card, and I'm kind of coping and hoping that Blue-White Stoneblade, Blue-White Stoneblade, Blue-Red Stoneblade Jeskai may be back. I mean, one big issue with like Stoneblade mid-range decks is that like Cauldron is a really good card to grab, and then Batterskull is not very good, and your swords aren't very good either. But Cryptic Coat I think fills like a really good role where it's a 3-mana equipment. So if your Stoneforge Mystic dies, you have like a relatively powerful follow-up play. If you haven't read this card, it's a 3-mana equipment. When it enters the battlefield, you get to Cloak, which is a face-down 2/2 with Ward 2. And this gets +1/+0, can't be blocked. And the big thing is, for 2 mana, you can bounce it to your hand. So if your Stoneforge Mystic lives, you can just, for 4 mana, bounce it to your hand, replay it. Bounce it to your hand, replay it, and just make a 2/2 Ward 2 over and over and over again. And this is kind of an exciting dynamic in Stoneblade, which is a deck that doesn't have a lot of good card advantage engines usually, and is oftentimes like trying to hold up a bunch of counter spells. So the fact that you can hold up mana, bounce the coat, replay it, I think is really cool. And it also makes like playing Ephemerate in these kind of decks a lot better too, where you can Ephemerate your Stoneforge Mystic and save it. You can like sometimes you can like grab Cryptic Coat, worried that your opponent might kill your Stoneforge Mystic, leaving Cauldron stranded in your hand. If they don't do that, you can go like activate Stoneforge Mystic, response to that trigger, Ephemerate Stoneforge Mystic, grab Cauldron, put Cauldron in play. And then with the Ephemerate rebound trigger on the stack, you can put Cryptic Coat into play. Look at the top card of your library. If it's good, just Ephemerate it, put a Solitude into play, put a Teferi, put a land you need maybe in play. Or if not, you can just Ephemerate your Stoneforge Mystic and get another equipment. Also, hear me out. I think that your Stoneblade package, like your Stoneblade suite, will be 1 Cauldron, 2 Cryptic Coats. I kind of think you want to do that instead of playing like a Batterskull or a Sword, because those cards are just not very good. Also, notably, this card pitches to Force of Negation, Subtlety, so maybe sometimes you like grab it, pitch one, and then like Ephemerate it, get another one. I'm excited. I actually think it'll be good. Or at the very least, like if you're going to play a Stoneblade deck in Modern, you want to be playing this card, like almost for sure. But like, will Stoneblade decks be good? That's a kind of TBD, I guess. Analyze the Pollen is kind of like a redone Traverse the Uvenwald. Very similar cards. Both are able to put a basic land in your hand for 1 mana, and both can conditionally grab any creature or any land from your library. Traverse the Uvenwald requires you have Delirium. Analyze the Pollen requires you to exile spells with mana value 8 or more from your graveyard, which is weirdly more doable than achieving Delirium, and I think faster too. Just with cards like Generous End, Street Wraith, Troll of Khazad-dûm, it's pretty easy to dump a ton of mana value in your graveyard. And if you're playing a deck that's like built around Titania and you're trying to like find Titania, cast it, Zuran Orb, sack all your lands. I've played some lists that are like really built around Emrakul the Promised End, although this will have some tension with that, but really built around like getting a bunch of Eldrazi temples in play as quickly as possible. Mostly like I've just built like enough decks with Traverse to know that there have been several times this kind of effect would have been better. I don't think that these decks are like super good, but it's a really cool deck building tool that we will definitely try to explore. And I think that it's just going to be faster. Like the first copy of Analyze the Pollen is going to be online faster. Extra copies may be kind of difficult to trigger, but I don't know if that exactly matters so much. But a card I'm very excited to play with, but maybe we'll not get to it as fast as some of the other cards on this list. Worldsoul's Rage is a card I think will probably take a long time to figure out if it's good. But I think in theory, kind of conceptually, it has some potential. It's kind of just imagine on turn 3, you spend 3 mana, you kill a Ragavan, you kill a Dragon Rage's Channeler, you kill an Orcish Bowmaster, and then you return a land. That's a 2-for-1. Then every mana you spend after that, you kill something, you get back 2 lands for 4 mana. That's a 3-for-1. You kill something, you get back 3 lands. That's a 4-for-1 for 5 mana potentially. Also has like some interesting implications and like weird Amulet of Vigor decks that I like to play, and you can like even potentially like play Lotus Field, have 2 amulets in play, make 6 mana. Worldsoul's Rage, X equals whatever you need it to be. Return Lotus Field, get a bunch more mana, and like kind of go off a little bit. I don't know that that's the direction you want to go, but I'm open to it. There's also the kind of card that like maybe just needs something else to make it potentially really powerful. But I'm kind of optimistic about this card, but I expect to have to like cook with it for a long time to figure out like a real deck. Now, I don't think this is like the new Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but it kind of reminds me of it. The 3-mana Case. When it enters the battlefield, you discard a card, then draw 2, and then if your hand has no cards, it's solved. And then, at the beginning of your upkeep for the rest of the game, you discard your hand, which, if you're building your deck correctly, should be no cards, and then you draw 2, which is 2 extra cards a turn because you still get your draw step. That excites me. The fact that this enters the battlefield, lets you rummage, so even if like they Leyline binding it or Haywire Might, you're still getting some value off of it. The fact that you're probably solving this really fast, if this is like the top end of your curve in a mono red deck, you could be like kind of M. Hayashi style, like mono red mid range deck that curves out here. It's gonna be harder to empty your hand without Fury, I guess. But if this is the top of your curve and you're a mono red deck or red white or something, red black, shouldn't be that hard to empty your hand. And when you do, you are all of a sudden drawing 3 cards a turn. And that's exciting to me. I don't know if this is exactly like what Modern is about right now either, you know, with like Amulet Titan and Yawgmoth and Rhinos. Like, I don't know that 3 mana value engines are where you want to be, but I'm open to it. I'm gonna look for a good shelf for this card, and I think it may pleasantly surprise us. I don't think Push Pull will make giant waves in Modern or anything, but it is a card I like a lot in specifically Esper Gorios, which is a deck that I think is a little underrated. The front half of Push is a pretty mediocre to bad removal spell. For 2 mana, you can destroy a tapped creature. But it is relevant against a lot of cards in the format, like Dothy Voidwalker, Ragavan, Dragon Rage's Channeler. And for 6 mana, you can put up to 2 creature cards from a single graveyard, including your opponent's graveyard, if that's ever relevant, onto the battlefield under your control. They gain haste, and then you sacrifice them at the beginning of the end step. So I could see you playing like 1 or 2 copies of this in Esper Gorios, where it deals with some problematic early threats. It gives you extra reanimation targets where sometimes, or reanimation effects where sometimes in the late game you can go end of turn Gorios, they counter, you untap, you get to cast Pull. But it also just pitches to Grief and Solitude, which is I think a pretty big deal for this kind of effect, that it pitches to both of your cards. I also really like that just like buying back Grief and Solitude from this, or like 2 Griefs, 2 Solitudes, Archaeologist, Mulldrifter, will give you a lot of value in kind of the late game, which I think can be nice. I think one problem with Atraxa decks is that you kind of lack early removal, and you kind of lack like some haymakers if your opponents are like 1-for-1ing you really hard, and I think this kind of helps compensate for that pretty well. It is also nice that if you ever get up to 7 mana and you cast Pull, you can ephemerate whatever creature you target and save your creature from being sacrificed, just like if you were to Gorios your Atraxa. And so it's nothing too crazy, but like 1 or 2 of an Esper Gorios, and a pretty cool card at that. Voja, Jaws of the Conclave may not have been a card you expected to see on this list, but I've been playing a lot of Elves. Elves are really not that bad, and I probably will play one of these in my Elves deck going forward. It's a 5 mana 5/5 Vigilance Trample Ward 3, which is quite a lot of text on it by itself. But also, whenever it attacks, you put X counters on each creature you control, including Voja, where X is the number of elves you control, and then you draw a card for each wolf you control. I think being able to like Court of Calling for this on your opponent's instep, especially if they're like holding up removal for Azuri, is just going to be game over at a lot of spots. It's kind of like a Crater Hoof that's like super castable and is like pretty easy to court for, and you have to kind of untap with for it to win the game, but also untapping with it is pretty doable. It has Ward 3. It's also very hard castable. You should just be able to put a Sacred Foundry and Temple Garden in a more fetch land focused Elves deck and play 1 copy of this. I even think there's a small chance this card like really overperforms and impresses, and you end up playing more than 1 copy. But I like Elves a lot. I think Elves is more playable than people give it credit for. It is not a deck I'd recommend for a tournament at the moment, but this is going to the deck, and I'm excited. Humans has been a deck that's been struggling in Modern for like 4 years at least. And we have 2 kind of medium plus cards that you might play in the deck. We've got Assemble the Players that lets you cast once a turn a creature spell with power 2 or less from the top of your library. And you have Delney, Streetwise Lookout, who lets creatures with power 2 or less not be able to block by with creatures power 3 or greater. And if an ability a creature you control power 2 or less triggers, the ability controls an additional time. You get to double up triggers of like Esper Sentinel, Thales Lieutenant, Imperial Recruiter. I also think it's very cool that these 2 cards work well together, caring about creatures with power 2 or less and like a little white human shell. I do think you can kind of get weird with both of these cards if you want to. You can play them in like a Heartless Summoning deck and like use Assemble of Players, like cast stuff on the top of your library, and Delney to like cast for 1 mana, then another card for 1 mana, and you're going off, you're comboing off, and I think those decks don't end up being very good usually, but this is potentially a nice upgrade, and I think mostly this is going to be like humans tools. We'll see though. I will try to build the wacky decks first, and then eventually do humans with these cards, I think. Here's a handful of playable commons that are in the new set. We've got Novice Inspector, 3-Aid Inspector 2. You'll play this in like your Convoke decks and Pioneer and Modern. We've got the Deuce, draws a card, puts a clue token into play. Cool for creativity decks in both Pioneer and Modern. Might be kind of surprised to see Toxin Analysis here. I have it here because in Pioneer there's like this really cool Goblins deck that uses a 1 mana Death Touch instant in combination with Goblin Chain Whirler to destroy all of your opponent's creatures. This one is a lot better because it also investigates. Big upgrade to a very, very fringe deck, but a deck that I do like a lot. There's also Demand Answers, a card that I hope to register in some decks, a card I know I would have registered in some decks in the past. It's a 2 mana instant that you can either sacrifice an artifact or discard a card to draw 2. So this is kind of like a hybrid Tormenting Voice Deadly Dispute red, which I think is an interesting tool. We also have Rebel Belt Maverick, a 1 mana 1/1 that enters the battlefield and surveils 2, and you can also, for 1 green, exile from your graveyard and put a counter on a creature. I don't really like this card that much. It is a card that I'm going to be thinking about when I'm building creature-based graveyard decks. Were Hogaak still legal, we'd be playing this card probably. I think that you're probably not going to want to really be playing this in like Dredge or Hollowvine or whatever, but it may end up surprising you after you play it, and it's a card on my radar and a card I'm going to try a little bit, and who knows, could find the right place at the right time one day. Case of the Uneaten Feast is a pretty cool Soul Sister Johnny's Welcome variant, a 1 mana enchantment that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can gain a life, and to solve the case, you can gain 5 or more life in 1 turn. The case gets solved, and then at any point after that, you can sacrifice the case to cast any number of creatures from your graveyard this turn. I've dabbled a little bit with Amalia combo in Modern to varied results. I think the deck is okay, a little underrated, would love some more eyes on the archetype. I could see myself playing this card over some of the cards in the deck. I really do dislike that it doesn't tap for Convoke. I've been really liking a more Convoke focused build in both Modern and Pioneer. This is not a creature, but it is a very powerful card, and I do like that solving it happens every single time you combo, obviously, but also I think solving it if you have Wildgrowth Walker plus a Note Scout is not going to be too difficult either, and will be a very powerful tool to fight through like a Control and Rakdos decks. And the number that you want to play of this card in these kind of decks is kind of confusing, kind of interesting, and we will try it at some point, and I hope that it ends up overperforming. Snarling Gorehound, what a name, is not quite the Black Dragon Rage's Channeler, but it is a 1-drop that surveils repeatedly. It's a 1 mana 1/1 with Menace, and whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters a battlefield under your control, you may surveil 1. I've played a good amount of like mono black Cauldron, mono black Gravecrawler, Bloodghast decks to various degrees of success, and this card will trigger a lot of those kind of decks. The ability to like have Bloodghast in play, sack it to Carrion Feeder, play a fetch land, return it, sack it to Carrion Feeder. That's going to trigger Gorehound a lot of times. Bowmasters triggers it twice by itself. If you have Gravecrawler, Carrion Feeder, you get to surveil a lot. I'm interested. I'm excited. I think this is more of like a deck building toolbox kind of card than anything, but in these kind of decks, I'm down to try the Gorehound. I think Drag the Canal has been the hardest card for me to evaluate during the spoiler season. There's a lot of text on it for a 2 mana instant. It's a 2 mana black and blue spell that says create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token, so like a Celestia Charm. And if a creature died this turn, you also get to gain 2 life, surveil 2, and then investigate. So like I've been having a very hard time evaluating how good is it for 2 mana, make a 2/2, gain 2 life, surveil, and investigate. I think pretty good. I think that's a pretty good effect. Obviously, a creature has to have died for that to happen, but I don't think it's going to be too tricky to trigger this pretty consistently in like a blue-black control deck. If you play this in like the Dimir Ring deck, you're going to be able to trigger it pretty often, and also the extra life gain will go a long way in your One Ring deck. I'll try it. Very, very hard to evaluate. This could just be a complete stinker, but this is a lot of text, and you can snapcast it. You can go like Snapcaster, Chump Block with Snapcaster, cast it. There's a lot going on. I am cautiously optimistic. So I don't exactly think that Hide in Plain Sight or Vanifar involved Enigma are better ways to cheat an Emrakul or Omniscience into play than Reenact the Crime, but they're both kind of interesting. Hide in Plain Sight lets you, for 4 mana, look at the top 5 cards of your library, cloak 2 of them, and put the rest on the bottom in the random order. Vanifar Evolved Enigma is a 4 mana 3/4. At the beginning of your coming turn, you can cloak a card from your hand or put a counter on each colorless creature you control. So if you're playing this in a deck with like Ephemerate, Soul Herder, you're going to be able to like turn over Omniscience and Emrakuls into play. Very likely like a much more casual strategy than competitive, but could end up surprising you a little bit. Could be fun to try. Could have some extra synergies, and I really just don't hate Hide and Plate Sight or Vannifar. Like they just both put like a bunch of like a reasonable amount of like power toughness into play. Like two Ward 2 creatures for 4 is like it's kind of interesting with the fact that they could be anything. You could flip them into Solitudes and Emrakuls and stuff, and Vannifar also like just lets you get the Emrakul out of your hand, which is like pretty cool. And I actually this is something I kind of don't expect to necessarily ever even play. I expect to start looking and get kind of lost and move on, but maybe one day we'll have some fun doing it. Another card I'm kind of cautiously optimistic for is Forensic Gadgeteer. It's a 3-mana 2/3. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you can investigate, and activated abilities of artifacts cost 1 less to activate. This is kind of like a redone Psy Master Thopterus, which is a card I do really dislike, although it's good in Legacy. Maybe this is more of a Legacy card than a Modern card. But it's kind of hard to evaluate for me too, where you're not making clue tokens exactly with this card. You're kind of making this new thing. It's like a clue token that only costs 1 mana to sacrifice. Sounds really good to me, especially in combination with Urza Lord High Artificer. You just like tap it to itself, sacrifice it to itself. So like every time you cast an artifact, if you have Urza, you get to draw a card. There's lots of like I could also see just being able to play like a Bobble and a Midnight, and then all of a sudden I have 2 clue tokens in play, and I'm just up a bunch of cards and some more grindy matchups with these like blue Urza style artifact decks. I played a lot of like mono blue Urza decks. There was a time where I thought that they were pretty good and had some success. That time is kind of long since passed, and I would imagine that like maybe some cards in Modern Horizons 3 to like buff the blue archetype, blue Urza archetype would like help a card like Forensic Gadgeteer get into Modern. Right now, probably not quite there, but something I do fully intend to try at some point. Occasionally, I've played blue decks that want 2-mana counter spells, and I've also been kind of struggling with the density of white cards for Solitude. I don't think this will happen super often, but in those kind of decks, I might choose to play some copies of No More Lies, because it is a 2-mana counter spell that pitches a Solitude. Also exiles the spell when it counters it. Not as relevant right now in Modern as it has been in eras with like Uro Kroxa, but a card that I could see myself very rarely playing in Modern. A card that I do think we'll see a reasonable amount of play in Pioneer, though. A lot of play in Pioneer, probably. Okay, let's talk about Breakout. I'm sure some of you have been wondering where this card is. I've been asked about it a lot on my Twitch chat. I've seen a lot of buzz about this card on Twitter. People are excited about this card. I think this card will probably see 0 Modern play. It is a 2-mana sorcery. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You can reveal a creature. If that creature has mana value 2 or less, it can go onto the battlefield with haste. That's exciting. And if it doesn't have mana value 2 or less, you can put it into your hand. And so I do agree that the idea of like spending 2 mana to put like a Territorial Kavu or a Tarmogoyf for like an Inti into play with haste for 2 mana, I'm on board. That sounds awesome. But to like kind of like reasonably have a density of hits here, you need like 24 creatures. So if you have 24 creatures, I've got the calculator here, you're about 96.3% to hit 1 or more creatures. So that you're bricking still like 3.5% of the time. It's not amazing numbers. It's not the worst ever either. But I think if you have like less than 24 or 23, 22 if you're like super greedy, or if you can do like 21, 22 if you have like Street Wraith, Oval Chase Daredevil, like these kind of like mediocre hits that like still put creatures into your hand. But I also just don't know that you can build a deck that has 20 plus 1 and 2 mana creatures plus 4 breakouts and have like a functioning Modern deck. Your curve is going to be like super duper low. You're going to be slow. You're going to be slower than a lot of decks in the format like Titan, Yawgmoth, and you're going to not have almost any disruption. So I just don't really know how this card ever gets there. I would recommend not spending a lot of time trying to break out. But if you disagree with me, I do encourage you to prove me wrong, because I could be wrong. We'll see. I dropped out of college, so maybe don't trust my math too much. And we've got lastly a handful of kind of cool sideboard cards. Urgent Necropsy is a 4-mana instant that you have to collect evidence X, where X is the total mana value of permanents you're targeting to destroy up to 1 artifact, enchantment, creature, planeswalker, I could see myself in Jund and or Yawgmoth playing occasionally like 1 or 2 copies of this in my sideboard. Maybe Yawgmoth like ends up really liking this card against like Amulet Titan scales, and you end up playing 2 pretty stock. I can see that happening. I can see it not happening also. We've got on this side Doorkeeper Thrall, kind of the latest Torpor Orb variant. Very, very cool that this card has flash, so you can kind of like make your opponents play into it. 2 mana, 1/2 flash flying. Artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield do not cause abilities to trigger. I'm excited about this card. Or I guess I would be if I played more Taxes style decks. I don't know. I'll put in some sideboards. Good modern sideboard card. We also have Cease and Desist. This one is kind of weird where it's not a super powerful sideboard card, but it is really versatile and can come in against a lot of decks. Where the front half is good against burn, gain 2 life, draw a card for 2 mana. I would really like to have that in my deck against burn. It's also very relevant graveyard hate too. Like I would love to have this against any deck where graveyard hate is relevant. And then what's cool is you can also bring this in against like Scales, Hammer, and like for 6 mana you get to win the game, destroy all artifacts and enchantments. But if you draw it early, you can just cycle it and gain 2 life, which is also relevant against decks like Scales and Hammer sometimes. And it pitches to Grieve, pitches to Solitude. I like this card. You could even like potentially main deck it. Probably not, but occasionally think about putting this in your. There's also Kroll Whipcracker, a black-green 3/2 reach, and it enters the battlefield to destroy a target token opponent controls. I don't think this is really good against any existing deck in Modern, but I could see this being like a relevant card one day. It's kind of good against like Fable of the Mirror Breaker. You could Court of Calling for it. Just keep it on your radar. It may show up one day. That's the video. Try to keep these as short as possible. I feel like I'm getting a little bit shorter and faster every time. Although I may look at the runtime of this video and I don't know. That might just not be true. There's a ton to talk about though. I had 30 slides this time. I think that's more than average. It's gonna be an awesome set. I'm really excited to be brewing. I hope you join me. Follow the Twitch, follow the YouTube. See you next time. Bye.